This show may contain adult language and themes. Listener discretion is advised. With that out of the way, let's start the show. My Sign podcast, Side Slice. I'm your host, Jordy Death, here to light your way through the true crime astrology storm. And this, ladies and gentlemen, guys and ghouls, is the end of season 1 recap. And truth be told, I tried really hard. Well, I think hard is probably not the right word to use because, I didn't try all that hard. But I did try to put in an effort to get this episode done and out on Halloween. But, it just never happened. And also, I was going to a Tool concert with my best friend, Tim. And it was snowing and it was just bonkers crazy. So it just did not work out. And then life kind of got away from me because I recently started dating this wonderful, wonderful man, Kyle, and I've been spending a lot of my time with him and just doing other things too. It's end of the year, holidays are upon us, so I've just been really busy working on presents for people and things like that. And I wouldn't lie if I didn't say that there was also maybe a little bit of seasonal depression going on too. I'm doing well, no worries about that. I'm still medicated and everything like that. It's just my energies have been going everywhere else but the podcast, which is kind of dumb, I guess, in a way, because I'm supposed to be using this time to prepare for next season. So I really just want to get this done and out of here so that way I can start actually preparing for next season and I don't have to worry about this anymore. I do have a couple of episodes already lined up. There are going to be Side Slice episodes, but good friend Lanier and Lucas came over. We did an amazing, really freaking funny episode on conspiracy theories, helping my buddy Lucas out with his podcast. So I'm really excited to hear what he's going to be doing and things like that. So definitely stay tuned and up to date with all that. So anywho, as I mentioned before, this is your end of season 1 recap for Murder Is My Sign. And I just wanted to touch base and go over the list of everyone we talked about and really kind of just, I guess, reminisce about how much the show has grown over the course of the year. So back in November of 2018, I launched Murder Is My Sign and began with the serial killer list that was given to me on Facebook. And you can go back and listen to the very first episode if you want. And since I've launched, there's been a lot of big changes. I originally was with Buzzsprout as my hosting site. And, back in, September or October, I moved over to Sprecher, where I'm now making a little bit of ad revenue. So, every time you guys listen to my podcast and you hear an ad or you share my podcast, it really does help me. And I know, ads can be really annoying, but just remember, every time you hear that, you're helping me with my art, and I really, really appreciate that. So we switched hosting sites, and the format has changed a little bit over the course of the year. Originally, in the original list that I was tagged in on Facebook, there was 28 names of serial killers and spree killers. And only 4 signs of the zodiac were represented, with Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. And it's kind of interesting that whoever originally created that list included each element of the zodiac: air, earth, fire, and water, respectively. Now, of course, when you Google serial killer zodiac list, there's a lot of different lists out there with different killers and signs being represented. I'm just using this list that I was tagged in. And so I would recommend going back to the very first episode if you want to hear exactly who was on this list, because as you will soon hear and see, if you haven't been really following along, we diverted quite a bit. So I verified the killers and their birthdays on this list, and it was discovered that Alton Coleman was labeled as a Sagittarius is actually a Scorpio. So you can go back to the Scorpio episode if you want and listen to his story and that of Charles Manson, because back then I did 2 killers in that episode. And that was my thought about wanting to just cover everyone that was under the signs. And for Scorpio, I had 2 people. Sagittarius, I had 3. But then, as I was getting up and up, Gemini, I think I had originally like 8 people. And Virgo, I had like 8 or 10. It was just crazy. So I ended up just cutting that out and just focusing on one person after the Pisces episode. And also a good reminder, folks, is I started the podcast in the sign of Scorpio, which is mid-October through mid-November. The beginning of the zodiac does not start until March and April with the sign of Aries. So we kind of started at a weird time. In season 2, I plan on launching in January just because it's the beginning of a calendar year. I think it'd be a little too late to launch it in the sign of Aries personally. Because I want to be on a hiatus that long, because I think the longer you put something off, the more you just kind of like lose the drive for wanting to do it. You know what I mean? So anywho, over the course of the season, I ended up covering 17 serial killers, and only one of them was a woman, Eileen Wuornos. And she wasn't even on the original list that I was referencing. And so I hope going into season 2, I will be covering more women and more people of, colors, backgrounds, things like that. Because inclusion's important, even when you're a violent criminal, right? So who knows? Pisces, Scorpio, and Sagittarians, as I mentioned, had multiple serial killers covered within their signs of the episodes I did. And after Pisces, I just decided to focus on one killer per sign. And I just kind of went with a killer that was either the well-known, or if I couldn't find anyone, I just found a killer that would match that zodiac sign, because I still had to fill out the list. Of course, when I got to Gemini, I did a 3-part series on Jeffrey Dahmer, and then only to outdo myself with Virgo with doing a 4-part episode on Ed Gein, which for myself, I thought that was a lot of fun. I loved being able to really get deep into the storytelling with those 2 people and really spread it out. So my plan with season 2, Killer Couples, Deadly Duos, is it will be like one main couple for that month. And I'm not going to focus on getting signs out or whatever, because we've already covered that here in this episode, in this season. That's going to be on compatibility, but I really want to tell the story and paint the picture. And it's going to be one episode a week. Ideally, fingers crossed, I can actually get my ass on a regular recording schedule. That is my goal. That is my resolution for 2020, is to get on a regular recording schedule. So wish me luck. Pray for me. Hopefully we can actually get this, on regularity. So, but anywho, so for this recap, what I ended up doing is going back and looking at all the star charts I did on the people that we covered. And I wrote down their birthday, where they were born, how many planets were in retrograde, and what they were. And then also what was their split of masculine and feminine signs, as well as the elements and the qualities of the signs, such as cardinal, mutable, or fixed. And then I also wrote down what their Chiron was in. And remember, Chiron is the quote-unquote planet, even though it's not really a planet, of core wounds and healing gifts. So it's kind of like what you attract to yourself and what you bring to the table. I know I think I've covered that occasionally in some episodes throughout the season. So, but yeah, let's start at the beginning of the zodiac and then just do a little recap of the information and refresh our memories on who these assholes were that I talked about over the year. So for the sign of Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, we talked about Donald Harvey, who was born on April 15th, 1952 in Boonville, Kentucky. Harvey was known as the Angel of Death because he killed upward of 50 plus people while working as an orderly in various hospitals. When he was born, there were 5 planets in retrograde at the time. Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto. Now remember, when a planet is in retrograde within your chart, it means that the energies that are often associated with that planet and sign are turned more inward and can be muted. So not a huge deal, it doesn't really do all that much, but I just thought this was something kind of interesting to kind of keep track of. So Harvey had 7 masculine and 3 feminine signs, air and fire having the masculine association and water and earth having the feminine. Granted, not a lot of modern day astrologers use these qualities within their readings. I personally just find it more interesting than anything. Characteristically, though, in astrology, masculine signs are energetic and very active. And with his high kill count, you can kind of sort of draw that correlation there. Also, the qualities of the signs are broken up into 3 categories. You have cardinal, fixed, and mutable. Each element of the zodiac has a sign within one of these qualities. The cardinal signs are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. And these people are often open to change and tend to project themselves onto their surroundings and want to change their environment. The fixed signs are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And much like the namesake, these signs are fixed and resistant to change. They're not easily swayed, and they tend to mold their environment to their will. And finally, the mutable signs are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. These folks are very flexible and changeable. They are adaptable to their environment and very mentally explorative and intellectual. So with Donald Harvey, he had 8 cardinal signs, 2 fixed signs, and 0 mutable signs. So he wasn't very flexible, you could say. When someone is weighted with cardinal energy, they are more likely to be restless, impatient, domineering. And when someone lacks mutable energy, as in this case, they lack adaptability. So we got a stubborn, imbalanced asshole with a penchant to kill helpless people in hospitals. So, maybe I'm stretching this just a little bit to connect all the dots, but before I move on, let's not forget the elementals of his chart. So Mr. Angel of Death over here has 5 fire signs, 1 earth sign, and 2 air signs, and 2 water signs. Now, fire signs need to be expressive, and they tend to express themselves and can be impulsive. Also, with Donald Harvey being an Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, they tend to have a me first type attitude, much like the oldest sibling in a family. Or so I've been told, I'm an only child, so whatever. What I find most interesting, though, in the little bit of information I collected for this is that his Chiron is in the sign of Capricorn, which can mean obsessive ambition, the use of career as an escape, family dysfunction, and fixation on gaining status and approval. And so the whole using the career as an escape, that kind of caught my ear and my eye. So, he killed people at work. I mean, do you count that as a hobby? Do you count that as a mental escape? How would you connect the dots there is, what I'm asking here. But yeah, so that's Donald Harvey in the nutshell. Moving on to Taurus. We have Mr. Macabre, Mr. BDSM himself, Albert fucking Fish, who was born on May 19th, 1870 in Washington, D.C. Now, within his chart, only one planet is in retrograde, and that was Saturn. He has an equal balance of 5 masculine and 5 feminine signs, and his qualities break down with 4 cardinal and an even split of mutable and fixed with 3 each. So far, his chart is fairly balanced. The elements break down with 4 earth, 1 water, 3 fire, and 2 air. When you have a lot of earth in your chart, you tend to be more practical and stable. And when you lack water in your chart, you can also lack general sensitivity to other people's feelings and can be selfish. So remember, earth signs, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, they're very grounded people. And water signs, Scorpio, Cancer, and Pisces are very intuitive and very emotional. So those qualities that are often associated with the signs are also associated with the elements that correlate to them, if that makes sense. And if you remember what Albert Fish did to his victims, you can absolutely see that he completely lacked any sensitivity at all. He was a fucking psychopath, honestly. And if you go back and you listen to the Taurus episode, just, fair warning, it is disgusting. It is very much a trigger warning. There's a lot of gross sexual things that happen, and then also cannibalism and killing children. So just a fair warning, if you haven't already heard or listened to the terrifying Taurus episode I did back in May, you listen at your own risk. But before we move on, let's cover his Chiron. So his Chiron's in the sign of Aries, which means that their core wounds are anger management, lack of self-worth, and they need to be number one. So again, Aries being the first sign, wanted to be the whole me first type thing. That would make a lot of sense that as their Chiron being in Aries, that would be like one of their wounds. Like they always have to be number one. So, moving on to Gemini is my main man, Jeffrey Dahmer, Milwaukee's own Cream City cannibal, born on May 21st, 1960 in good old Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Dahmer has 3 planets in retrograde, Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. His masculine and feminine signs are equally balanced, again, with 5 and 5. And the qualities are also balanced with 4 cardinal, 3 mutable, and 3 fixed. Dahmer has 4 earth signs, 3 fire signs, 2 air signs, and 1 water sign. The last 3 points match perfectly with that of Albert Fish, which is kind of cool and kind of creepy, I guess. His Chiron is in the sign of Pisces, and the core wounds associated with this is the fear of asserting boundaries, escapism, addiction, denial, and not living in reality, and having a parent with addiction or who is mentally ill. If we remember, Dahmer was an alcoholic from a very young age, and his mother abused prescription drugs and was very mentally ill throughout his high school career, I guess. High school days, high school years, whatever. When Dahmer was in high school, he used escapism such as acting out, which later became known as pulling a Dahmer. To escape, and from the shit that was going on at home because his parents were going through a very, very messy divorce. And even though he only had 3 planets in retrograde, I just wanted to point out that Pallas, Juno, and Vesta were also in retrograde. And those are kind of clumped in with, I think, the South Node and also Chiron. They're more of the lesser known things that not a lot of astrologers talk about. And I didn't really spend too much time within the podcast talking about that in itself, but I just thought it was kind of interesting. So up next is the sign of Cancer, and we covered Karl Panzram, who was a brute of a man and an absolute savage. Panzram was born on June 28th, 1892 in East Grand Forks, Minnesota. Minnesota representer, eh? He had 2 planets in retrograde, Venus and Uranus. The masculine and feminine signs are equally balanced with 5 and 5, as well as the qualities of cardinal with 4, mutable and fixed are both balanced with 3. The balancing act goes askew, though, with the elements, because he has 4 water, 3 air, 2 fire, and 1 earth. Alright, I'm pretty sure that accent's probably annoying you guys, too. And to be fair, just a side note, I was born in Minnesota, and I live in Wisconsin, so fuck you guys, I can get away with saying that. Anywho, Panzram's Chiron is in the sign of Leo, which means he would have had a very large need for validation, attention, and approval. Also, an addiction to drama and presenting a false front would have been like the core wounds for him in that position too. So, if you recall, Panzram had an incredibly difficult childhood with going in and out of jail from a very young age. Now remember, this was in the 1920s. Which is super weird to say that was like 100 years ago. But yeah, we're going into 2020 now, and that's just blowing my mind. Anywho, so Karl Panzram knew a hard life from a very young age and was very violent and aggressive. Near the end of his life, he took to writing in a journal, especially when he was in jail, where he used really colorful language and descriptions of what he did to his victims. And you could really sense his flair of drama through that. If you want the full details, you can listen to the Cranky Crustration episode where I talk about the sign of Cancer and Karl Panzram. Our next summer sign is that of Leo, the lion, and in that episode we cover Johann Jack Unterweger, born on August 16th, 1951 in Judenburg, Austria. He has just 2 planets in retrograde, Venus and Jupiter. He has 6 masculine signs and 4 feminine signs within his chart. 5 cardinal, 3 fixed, 2 mutable are the qualities that were found with him. And the elements are a little bit more even than the previous sign, with 3 fire, 3 air, 2 water, 2 earth. His Chiron is in the sign of Sagittarius, but was also in retrograde. So the core wounds associated with this placement are fanatical or zealous beliefs, disruptive nomadic tendencies, aggressive or tactless communication style, and chasing the high of the next big thing. Jack was a resident, quote-unquote, celebrity whose mother was a whore, and he enjoyed traveling the world and killing prostitutes, so that nomadic tendency, I guess, kind of slips into there. His episode is Lethal Leos, so be sure to check it out if you haven't already. As we enter the end of summer, we also enter the sign of Virgo, and be careful as you enter because Virgos are virgins after all, and this is their first time. That joke doing anything for you guys? Anywho, I did a 4-part episode on Wisconsin native Ed Gein, who ironically was also a virgin, so, whatever. But Ed Gein was born on August 27th, 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And at the time of his birth, only 2 planets again were in retrograde, Saturn and Uranus. Again, we see an even balance of masculine and feminine signs with 5 each. Mutable signs are 4, cardinal 2, and fixed is 4. Fire and water are both balanced with 3 each, and air and earth are both at 2 each. So a little bit more balanced than other charts, I believe. And his Chiron is in the sign of Aquarius, but also in retrograde, just like Jack Unterweger. These core wounds are destructive rebellion, scientific detachment from emotions, and trying to fit in. Well, we knew that old Eddie Gein had a very, quote-unquote, scientific fascination with dead women, and an eye for fashion, you could say. But if you want to hear the whole story in all of its gory details, be sure to listen to all 4 parts of Ed Gein, Vile Virgo. I promise you, you won't regret it. It is the coup de grace, the creme de la creme, the height, the epitome of my podcast, and I'm very proud of those episodes. So now, as we leave Virgo, we are entering into the fall and the sign of Libra. And here is where we talked about the serial killer Bobby Joe Long, which also concluded season 1 of the podcast. So Bobby Joe Long was born on October 14th, 1953 in Canova, West Virginia. What makes Bobby Joe Long stand out is that he is the only one of 2 serial killers that I've covered this season with 0 planets in retrograde at the time of his birth. The masculine and feminine energies are balanced again with 5 each. Cardinal is 5, fixed is 2, and mutable has 3 signs. The elements are a bit more wonky here though. Fire, he has 1, he has 3 earth signs, 4 air signs, and only 2 water signs. Now, when someone has a lot of air in their chart, or is an air sign in general, as is the case here, they usually are great communicators and intelligent. Remember, Gemini is also an air sign, and they are known as being one of the best communicators in the entire zodiac. His Chiron is in the sign of Capricorn, and the core wounds associated with this are obsessive ambitions, using the career as an escape, fixation on gaining status and approval, from family and approval. Fixation on gaining status and approval and family dysfunctions. Commas, people. Let me tell you, commas are very important when you're writing. That's what screwed me up here. So like Donald Harvey also had his Capricorn in Chiron and Capricorn, I should say. So, but the brief things that we talked about with Bobby Joe is that he had a lot of family dysfunction, and his dad was never really in the picture, and he ended up sleeping in the same bed with his mother until he was 13. And also, let us not forget that he suffered multiple head injuries as a child growing up. So, if you want to hear more about his episode, you can definitely listen to the Libra episode, which is basically the one before this. So make sure you go check that out if you haven't already. So now we are entering where we originally started the series a year ago with the sign of Scorpio. And here is where I covered Charles Manson and Alton Coleman. So Charles Manson was born on November 12th, 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio. And he had 2 planets in retrograde, Uranus and Pluto. He has 3 masculine signs and 7 feminine signs within his chart. Feminine signs are characterized as being receptive, magnetic, and possessing strong inner resources. He has 2 cardinal, 2 mutable, and 6 fixed signs within his chart as well. With such a high fixed sign count, Manson was not easily swayed in his beliefs. Instead, he persuaded others to join in on what he believed. And he could have been very tyrannical within his beliefs too. I mean, duh. You don't say helter-skelter. I mean, come on. He started the whole Manson family, which was basically a cult. The elements, though, are not really balanced at all because he has 1 fire sign, 2 earth, 2 air, and 5 water. So with a high amount of water, we know that he was very open emotionally and can adapt to people with their sensitivities and kind of pick up on that, much like other water signs have that abilities. And Charles Manson is the only person on this list who has his Chiron in the sign of Gemini in retrograde. So what does this mean? Well, the core wounds for those who have Chiron and Gemini is the fear of being alone without a twin. And let us not forget that Gemini is the sign of the twins. So if Chiron shows us our weaknesses and core wounds, or for whatever sign it is in, then that just makes perfect sense. So you're missing your twin because your Chiron's in Gemini. So that it all just kind of comes full circle. In this position, Chiron and Gemini persons are also approval-seeking, have an addiction to gossip, anxiety about being judged, and a constant pivoting that makes it impossible to finish what they start, also known as sparkly pony syndrome. Ooh, shiny. So it's kind of like really bad ADD, I guess, with how that position is, because you start something, but then you get distracted and you start something else. So, moving right along. During Scorpio season, I also covered spree killer Alton Coleman. And Coleman was born on November 6th, 1955 in Waukegan, Illinois. Now, as a refresher, I will remind you that Coleman killed a slew of children across the Midwest, Wisconsin included, from May to July in 1984. Along with Bobby Joe Long, Alton Coleman is the only other serial killer on this entire list that I covered this season with no planets in retrograde at the time of his birth. He is heavily weighted with masculine energy, though, coming in with 8 masculine signs and only 2 feminine signs. Similar to Charles Manson, he has 6 fixed signs, but 3 cardinal and only 1 mutable sign. And that's pretty much where the similarities end, though, because Coleman comes in with a whopping 5 fire signs, 3 air signs, 2 water signs, and 0 earth signs within his chart. When someone is deficient in earth in their chart, they're more likely to be impractical and may have trouble holding on to money. They may also lack the ability to work hard and tend to grow impatient if the results of their efforts are too long in coming. Coleman is the second of 4 killers on this list who have their Chiron in the sign of Aquarius. We've already covered that Virgo, Ed Gein, has his Chiron in Aquarius. And now this relates to Coleman, and how this relates to Coleman is, I'd say, destructive rebellion rings pretty high here. You can listen to the Scorpio Killers podcast and get a full scoop on Manson and Coleman and kind of get more background on what they did. Now, Sagittarius is up next, and right now, as I release this episode, we are currently in the sign of Sagittarius. So here is where I covered 3 people in this hour-long episode. I started with Ted Bundy, who was born on November 24th, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. Bundy is the second of 3 killers on this list who has 5 planets in retrograde: Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto. He is weighted with masculine energy, with 7 masculine signs in his chart, and only 3 feminine. He has 5 fixed signs, 4 mutable signs, and only 1 cardinal sign. And much like Alton Coleman, he has 5 fire signs, 0 earth signs, and then flipped to 2 air signs and 3 water signs. What I find most interesting about his chart, besides the 5 retrograde planets, is that his Chiron is in the sign of Scorpio, and the core wounds here are nihilism, sexual addiction, possibly from childhood abuse, power struggles, jealousy, obsession, and trouble leaving bad relationships. I mean, Jesus, it's like a short description on Ted Bundy himself. So sorry, folks, if you find that your Chiron's in the sign of Scorpio, you're very similar to Ted Bundy. Sorry. But definitely go and listen to the episode because it's great. Anywho, so next in this episode, I covered Timothy Krieger. Did I pronounce it Krieger or Kreisier? I apologize for the inconsistency in that. But in all honesty, looking back at it, I probably should have just cut him out and just focused on Bundy and Kemper. But hindsight and being what it is and all that jazz. So Kreisier was born on November 28th, 1944 in West Mahoney Township, Pennsylvania. He was born just 2 years before Bundy and only has 3 planets in retrograde: Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto. Uranus and Pluto were in the same signs as Bundy, but then again, the outlier planets will usually hold a sign for many years. Masculine signs are 6, and feminine signs are at 4, so it's a bit more balanced than the last 2 guys. Cardinals at 3, fixes 2, and mutable signs have 5. Now, John Wayne Gacy is the only other killer on this list who also has 5 mutable signs within his chart. Chryseer's elements break down as 4 fire, 3 earth, 2 air, and 1 water. And his Chiron is in Libra, whose core wounds include the inability to commit to relationships, paralyzing indecision, romanticizing, trying to force peace at any price, and trouble ending relationships. So, Chryseer is so freaking forgettable, though, that I had to go back and actually read up on what he did and what he was known for. So a brief recap is, this guy had an unhealthy sexual and emotional obsession with his mother, and by 13, he was a voyeur and an exhibitionist. He went to school for administration justice. Most of his victims were older, like in their 50s, and all were basically tied up and raped before being killed. And I hate to say this, but he was basically just another generic serial killer, like hurting women, raping them, and, eventually getting caught. There's really nothing special about him other than he's an asshole who is surprisingly still alive, and although imprisoned today. So the last Sagittarius that I covered was one of the more interesting cases when I first started doing the show a year ago, and actually is right up there with Jeffrey Dahmer as being one of my more favorite people to talk about, because I just find his case so fascinating. This is, of course, Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer. Born December 18th, 1948 in Burbank, California. Ed Kemper is known for killing both of his grandparents, being institutionalized, released, going out and killing a bunch of co-eds before he ended up killing his mom and her friend and then fucking their corpses. And not just to his mom and her friend. He fucked the corpses of the co-eds that he also killed too. So, and then also did I mention that this guy clocks in at 6 feet 9 inches tall? Just like Timothy Krieger, though, Kemper has 3 planets in retrograde: Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto. The last 2 being in the same signs as Bundy and Chryseer. The masculine and feminine energies are balanced equally here with 5 and 5, and the qualities come in at 4 cardinal, 3 fixed, and 3 mutable. The elements are 3 fire, 4 earth, 2 air, and 1 water. His Chiron is in the sign of Sagittarius, making him the second of 3 killers on this list, Johann being the first. For Kemper, I think the core wounds of chasing the high of the next big thing and fanatical or zealous beliefs ring very true to him, and how he felt about the world, his mother, and women in general. Definitely check out the Sagittarius serial killer episode to hear more about him, along with Ted Bundy and Timothy Krieger. Entering the final Earth sign of the zodiac, though, we come with Capricorn, and here we covered Dr. Death, Harold Shipman, who was born on January 14th, 1946 in Nottingham. Now, Shipman killed upwards of 250 people, 215 of which have been confirmed, making Shipman the most absolute worst serial killer with the highest body count on this list. Now, Shipman is the third and last person on this list to have 5 planets in retrograde: Mars, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. The masculine and feminine energies are balanced with 5 each. Mutable energies is 2, fixed is 1, with cardinal at whopping 7. People who have a lot of cardinal signs in their chart can be restless, impatient, or domineering. The elements break down with 1 fire, 2 water, 3 earth, and 4 air signs. And his Chiron is in the sign of Libra, just like Timothy Krieger. And as I've said before with Krieger's Chiron, Libra and Chiron gives people an inability to commit to relationships, paralyzing indecision, romanticizing, trying to force peace at any price, and trouble ending relationships. So maybe he didn't want his relationships with his patients to end, so he decided to kill them, so that way they would be his forever. Very highly doubt that, but we can start this at any point to make any connection that we need, so really. But that is something interesting to think about, I guess. Now we're in the home stretch, and the last air sign is Aquarius, with my sign. And on my birthday, I released the Aquarian episode on Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. So Ridgway was born on February 18th, 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah. He was known for going after prostitutes, killing them, dumping their bodies along the Green River, and then going back and fornicating with the corpses. At the time of his birth in 1949, 4 planets were in retrograde: Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. The masculine energies outweighed the feminine 6-4, and the qualities of the signs go cardinal 2, 3 mutable, and 5 fixed. He is the only killer on the list to have 5 air signs, which is astounding. The other signs are 2 water, 2 earth, and 1 air. When you have a lot of air in your chart, I'm sorry, probably 1 fire. I kind of fucked that one up now that I'm thinking about that. Yeah, I really fucked that one up. Apologies, guys. Let's see, did I write this wrong? Aquarius. Yeah, 1 fire. I'm sorry, guys. 1 fire, 2 earth, 5 air, 2 water. Okay. I was in such a rush trying to type all this that I didn't really proofread it, so anywho. Okay, so when you have a lot of air in your chart, you usually can quickly grasp ideas, you're a great communicator, intelligent, and take a rational viewpoint on things, which is kind of ironic because Ridgway scored pretty low on the IQ test. His Chiron is in Sagittarius, making him the last of the serial killers covered this season out of 3. And as I've said for Kemper and Unterweger, who also have their Chirons in Sagittarius, this can create a fanatical or zealous belief in things, disruptive nomadic tendencies, aggressive or tactless communication style, and chasing the high of the next big thing. So feel free to check out the Aquarian Killer episode to find out more on Gary Ridgway, and just a moment of appreciation to the fact that I did that shit on my freaking birthday, yo, during the polar fucking vortex, when everything was fucking shut down. Anywho, so finally, the last fucking sign, Jesus Christ, Pisces, the fishes. Here, I did 3 different people. 2 in 1 episode, or I did 3 different people in 2 different episodes. So, I started with Eileen Wuornos, the only woman I covered this season, which I plan on doing more in the next season, so just you wait. Eileen Wuornos was born on February 29th, 1956 in Detroit, Michigan. A leap year baby. How special. Wuornos has 4 retrograde planets: Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. She has 6 masculine signs and 4 feminine signs. Cardinal and fixed are both at 4, and mutable is at 2. She has 4 fire signs, 3 water signs, 2 air signs, and 1 earth sign. And her Chiron is in the sign of Aquarius, just like her birthday buddy, who I also covered. Richard Ramirez was the other person in this episode that I talked about because he and Eileen both share the same birthday. So Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, was born on February 29th, 1960 in El Paso, Texas. He only had 3 planets in retrograde: Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Neptune is the only planet that is in the same sign for both Ramirez and Wuornos, though, which is in the sign of Scorpio. The other planets were in different signs. Kind of interesting how all that worked out in the span of 4 years. Ramirez has 5 masculine and 5 feminine signs. He has 4 fixed, 4 mutable, and 2 cardinal signs, with fire being at 3 water signs, and 2 air signs, and 2 earth signs. And as I mentioned, his Chiron is in Aquarius, making him the 4th killer on the list with the sign and Chiron in that. And as I've said for Geen, Coleman, and Wuornos already, Ramirez definitely displayed destructive rebellion and detachment from emotions and probably reality. You can listen to the Pisces Leap Day Killer episode to find out more about Eileen Wuornos and Richard Ramirez. The last and fucking least on this goddamn list of assholes is John Wayne fucking Gacy, the killer clown, born on March 17th, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois. So happy St. Patrick's Day, you dick. Gacy has only 2 planets in retrograde, Neptune and Pluto, and neither planet shares a sign with Wuornos or Ramirez. He has an equal split of masculine and feminine signs, just like Ramirez, though. And just like Kryger, he has 5 mutable signs in his chart. But that's where the similarities end, because Gacy's fixed is at 4, and he has only 1 cardinal sign within his chart. The elements are as follows: 3 earth, 3 air, 2 water, and 2 fire. A similar balance to that of Ramirez, but with some elements swapped around. Gacy's Chiron is in Leo, but it is in retrograde. Carl Panzram is the only other person on the list that I covered who also shares a Chiron in Leo. So the need for validation, attention, and approval runs high for those with Chiron in this position. They present a false front, sometimes as a clown, and they can have an addiction to drama, romance, love, and chasing the next high. Yep, so that sounds about right for Gacy. And you can listen to the half-hour-long episode entitled Killer Clown on Sprecher or your favorite podcasting app. And that, my dearly depraved friends, concludes the list of serial killers that we covered in Season 1 of Murder Is My Sign. Jesus Christ. Is anyone else tired? So what's next, you may be asking yourself? Well, from now until the new year, not a whole lot, honestly. I recorded a pretty awesome conspiracy episode with Linear and Lucas, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, a couple of weeks ago. And we'll probably be releasing that as a side slice, probably before the end of the year, but I don't know. Season 2 of Murder's My Sign, Killer Couples and Deadly Duos, will begin in January, and I will do my absolute best to get on a regular recording schedule. My tentative plan as of now is to focus on one killer couple or deadly duo each month, and release episodes each Friday. That will detail the story of what they did and how their charts work or didn't work, and I really just want to continue to keep the episodes at a reasonable listening length. So like around 30 to 40 minutes. But of course, with anything, humans plan and God laughs. So we shall see how things progress as the new year begins. So please stay tuned to the goings-ons of Murder Is My Sign. And be sure to follow me on social media. You can catch up with me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and Twitch, all at Jordy Death. That's Jordy Death. Or you can always email the show directly at murderismysignpodcast@gmail.com. Murder Is My Sign is now available on Spotify and Deezer, so be sure to share this podcast with anyone you can, any way that you can. If you love what you're hearing and you want to support the show, consider joining the Boneyard at patreon.com/murderismysign. Thank you to Michelle, Jake, Crystal, and newcomer Jessica for supporting the show this year, as well as past supporters, Holly. You guys are the best, and I really appreciate you all. That's going to do it for Season 1, everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful, safe, and very Merry Christmas season, and a fantastic New Year. I will see you all in 2020. Until then, take care of yourself and each other, and rest in peace.